Hey Commander players, it's EK, your EDH edutainer, with the deck tech that's definitely going to heat things up at your next game night. We're breaking down a Boros big burn deck led by Rem Karolus, a new legendary from Innistrad Midnight Hunt. Rem is a 2/3 legendary human knight with flying and haste for 1 a red and a white. He's low cost and has 2 keywords that are awesome. The real spice is his text box. He says if a spell would deal damage to you or a permanent you control, prevent that damage. Additionally, if a spell would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 1. Rem loves spreading damage across the board, so the basis of our strategy is directly leaning into that. We're going to ramp and ritual our way into casting big time burn spells and comboing off. Since Rem is going to protect our board while we're burning it, we also get to safely play a board-based aggressive strategy while we're at it as well. And it's definitely going to affect the pace at which we play the game. We don't have to live in fear of wiping our own board, so we're definitely going to be getting in there for those good old classic Boros beats. With our mana base and card economy online thanks to early engines like Mask of Memory, Sword of the Animist, and Valakut Exploration, let's set the proper stage for our game plan to shine. We're all about playing tons of burn and AoE while concurrently chipping away at our opponent's life totals with our board pressure since we're not affected by spell-based burn. However, there's one fatal flaw that we must address to make sure that we can execute our strategy properly. Rem actually doesn't give himself the same protection that he affords his team. So we've got to protect Rem so that his high-octane, destructive game plan doesn't hose us as well. And we can actually do this in a few different ways. Tajic Legion's Edge has a similar ability to prevent damage, but Tajic actually takes it to the extreme and prevents all non-combat damage that would be dealt to our creatures. This is going to be super relevant later, so keep this in mind. We've also got access to 2 weird, older cards that fit this role perfectly as well. Mark of Asylum is an enchantment for 1 and a white that prevents all non-combat damage that would be dealt to creatures we control. This is Tajik's text box on an enchantment, so the redundancy is super welcome, especially since enchantments can be a little peskier to remove. There's also Light of Sanction, which is 1 and 2 white for an enchantment that prevents all damage that would be dealt to creatures we control by sources we control. So our boards are protected from those big red AoE sweepers. Our opponents can burn us right back, or they can ping us down with creatures like Mayhem Devil. It's better than nothing, but there's also some advantages to the way this is worded, and we're definitely going to take advantage of this. Your opponent's going to feel really bad when they need to pop either of these enchantments over a Smothering Tithe or something like a Primal Amulet just to keep us in check. We also get to dip into the sword cycle a little bit as well. There's a few swords that give protection from red that are worthwhile running. Sword of Sinew and Steel is going to protect Rem from red burn, thanks to being pro-red, and give us additional answers to artifacts and planeswalkers, which is always welcome since those can be a little bit difficult to deal with. Plus, protection from black is quickly becoming a very important color immunity to have in the meta these days. So what sets this deck apart from your typical Boros deck? Well, Rem opens this up to some pretty interesting options in terms of card type and toolbox pieces. Radiant Scroll Wielder is 2 a red and a white for a 2/4 Dwarf Cleric that gives our instants and sorceries lifelink. They also say, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile an instant or sorcery card at random from your graveyard. You may cast it this turn. If a spell cast this way would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. So we can get that Wheel of Misfortune or Valakut Awakening back to hand and wheel our hands to keep digging for cards, or we can recur Search for Glory and tutor a key legendary creature or Snowland just in case we need to make a land drop. We could also recur one of our big power cards like Blasphemous Act and continually wrangle the board, or pop off and try and win the game. And that's not the only creature that's going to help us get extra mileage from our spells either. Backdraft Hellkite is a 5-mana 4/4 dragon with flying, and it says when it attacks, it gives each instant and sorcery card in our graveyard flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost, so we don't have to pay extra taxes, which means that we can be as efficient as possible. We're going to need a lot of mana to do everything that we want to do to the extent that we want to do it. So Nahab the Eternal is one of the best ways to get that extra mana flowing in. Nahab has been the big red burn commander for years, so it's only fitting that they're in our deck as well. Nahab is 3 and 2 red for a 4/6 zombie minotaur warrior. They've got a flick 3, and at the beginning of our post-combat main phase, we had a red for each 1 life that our opponents have lost this turn. So it could be a big earthquake in main phase 1, or it could be Rem leading the charge in the combat step. We're actually going to be running a few spells that are going to synergize really well with Nahab and act like rituals, but they're also just fantastic burn options to begin with, so we can piece these combos apart. Acidic Soil is 2 and a red for a sorcery that deals damage to each player equal to the number of lands they control. With Rem out, it's purely one-sided burn, and let's be honest, Everyone has to play lands, so that's always just going to be dealing damage. Price of Progress is going to double down on this as well. It's an instant for 1 in a red that deals damage to each player equal to twice the number of non-basic lands they control. This way we can really punish those greedy multicolored decks, and even just greedy decks in general. And with the push for so many utility lands and new cycles of dual lands being printed, greedier mana bases are becoming more commonplace. This card's also super cheap to cast, so we can cast it really early and still ritual off of it with Nehev. And with the way our deck is built, if Rem's not on the table for us, the absolute worst possible case is that we're taking maybe half a dozen damage. It's a small price to pay if it means that we're utterly blowing out our opponents. We can even use Sunforger to fetch this out of our deck, and then Mistveil Plains to put it back in, and then grab it right back out with Sunforger. With the stage set and some support pieces laid out, let's talk about the hallmark sort of spells of this deck. We're talking about those big burn spells, and there's no better place to start than the original big X spell, Earthquake. Earthquake is X in a red for a sorcery that deals X damage to each creature without flying and each player. The clause which specifies without flying is actually super massively important here. Like I mentioned earlier, Rem doesn't protect himself from spell-based damage, so spells like Earthquake that ignore him entirely are another way to protect him for our own volition and our own hubris. Molten Disaster is functionally the same as Earthquake, except it's X in 2 red, but we can kick it for an additional red and give it split second. That means that no one can add anything onto the stack until it resolves, making it very tricky to counter. In addition to Earthquake and Molten Disaster, we've got a few big red spells that are solely going to hit the board. These are actually going to end up doing the bulk of the work that our deck wants to be doing. They're going to be utilized for keeping the board state under control, in addition to being flipped on the offense with other utility pieces. So let's contextualize these big red spells with those utility pieces. To understand the extent of how much heavy lifting these spells can and will do, let's talk about what's enabling them to do so. Taralf, God of Fury, and Repercussion are 2 other major key players alongside Nehev in this deck that are really going to supercharge the effectiveness of our spells. Taralf is 2 and 2 red for a 5/4 god with Trample. He's one of the Kaldheim gods, so he doesn't have Indestructible. However, since we've got Rem at our disposal, it's totally fine. We don't have to worry about that. Taralf says whenever a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls is dealt excess non-combat damage, Taralf deals damage equal to the excess to any target other than that permanent. The simple way to put this is our spells have Trample now. Except say there's something big and scary elsewhere on the board that's still alive, we can push that Trample damage over onto a different player's board instead of having to push it straight towards that player's face. We can also take all of the excess damage on the table and funnel it onto one single target, and that could be a player. For our other burn payoff, we have to jump into a time machine back to 1999. Repercussion is an enchantment from Urza's Destiny for 1 and 2 red that reads, whenever a creature is dealt damage, Repercussion deals that much damage to that creature's controller. This card is just absolutely brutal. That Blasphemous Act that we were just talking about, yeah, that's dealing 13 damage to each player per creature they control. That chump block you're thinking about making, both players are going to take some damage for that decision. Repercussion is going to completely warp how the game is played when it's on the table. We're going to take that same burn damage, so we need to have some other protection pieces in place, like Rem to make sure that our creatures aren't taking the burn damage to begin with. Mark of Asylum is going to protect us from the burn damage and the repercussion, and Light of Sanction is going to do the same thing, except worded slightly differently. So if we have any of those 3 pieces, we really shouldn't have too much to worry about. So now that we've introduced the truth that is Taralf and Repercussion, let's get into some more big-time big red burn spells, and our suite of spell-based damage in more detail. We've already been over Blasphemous Act and Earthquake. Those are the easy ones that are fairly well known, so we're here for the real spice. Let's start small and work our way up. Breath of Darigaaz offers some great flexibility, and it can scale with our mana output. For 1 in a red, we can deal 1 damage to each creature without flying and each player. Or we can kick it for an additional 2 mana and deal 4 damage to each creature without flying and each player. Anger of the Gods is 1 and 2 red for a sorcery that deals 3 damage to each creature. If any creatures dealt damage this way would die, exile them instead. We love a little bit of graveyard hate here, and the fact that it happens naturally as part of our game plan is even better. Especially with these spells, keep in mind if Rem is on the table, the damage output is going to be bumped by 1 as well. So Breath is going to deal 2 damage if it's not kicked, and 5 damage if it's kicked. And Anger of the Gods is going to deal 4 damage, which is a huge breakpoint to hit. Volcanic Offering is going to offer us some non-basic land hate, as well as some creature removal. For 4 and a red, we get to cast an instant that says destroy target non-basic land you don't control, and target non-basic land of an opponent's choice that you don't control. Volcanic Offering deals 7 damage to target creature you don't control, and 7 damage to target creature of an opponent's choice that you don't control. This card's a 4 for 1, and we love to see that. Just be wary that both conditions have to be satisfied for the spell to resolve in the first place. There has to be 2 valid creature targets and 2 valid non-basic land targets. No less. Chain Reaction is really where things start to shift. For 2 and 2 red, Chain Reaction deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. Chain can especially get out of hand against token decks, or just a clogged board state in general, and scales with the ridiculousness of the game as well. Use Repercussion or Taralf in tandem with this spell, and watch the rest of the table utterly melt from that damage. I always like to pick one Secret Spicy Synergy card, and my low-key favorite card from this deck is Subterranean Tremors. It's X and a red for a sorcery that deals X damage to each creature without flying, so another Earthquake effect. If X is 4 or more, destroy all artifacts. If X is 8 or more, create an 8/8 red lizard creature token. Kind of adorable in a terrifying way. This card seriously checks off all the boxes for us. It has the scaling damage potential that we want. It has the utility to destroy all the artifacts, which we love. And it makes this awesome lizard. This lizard is going to be your new best friend, and frankly, an 8/8 on an empty board is a terrifying beater. But let's get even bigger than that. If there's a deck that ever loves Star of Extinction, this is it. It will utterly slam the door on a board, and it gives us even more single target land hate. Star of Extinction is 5 and 2 red for a sorcery that destroys target land and deals 20 damage to each creature in each planeswalker. This will absolutely end a game with Taralf or Repercussion on the table. However, in a pinch, we can just say screw you to the board and send it back to the Stone Age. One-sided, of course, because of Rem. Keeping our opponent's board clear of threats also means that they're being kept clear of blockers. We might be a big burn deck, but our creatures can certainly get in there for damage too. Aurelia the War Leader is the most iconic Boros legendary for a reason, and this deck is just going to be another reason to add to that laundry list of amazingness. We can even loop her with Sword of Hearth and Home for infinite combats. She's going to lead the charge for our survivors of the absolute onslaught we're going to inflict on the board, and she's going to bring the pain. The very top end doubles down on our major strategies in a broad beneficial sense. Gisela Blade of Gold Knight doubles the damage everyone deals to each other and halves the damage that we and our permanents take. Can someone say 26 damage Blasphemous Act? Because I certainly can. Well, what about a 39 damage Blasphemous Act? Or a 60 damage Star of Extinction? Fiery Emancipation is an enchantment for 3 and 3 red that says if a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage to that permanent or player instead. Unlike other amplifiers like Dictate of the Twin Gods or Furnace of Wrath, Fiery Emancipation only amplifies our damage, which means our opponents can't give us a taste of our own medicine. We definitely don't want to play ourselves into a corner, so these cards allow us to play a more balanced, flexible game that's going to help us reinforce our long-term consistency and our ability to have more fun more often as well. Even on the receiving end, there's something comical and memorable about this deck executing its win condition. That's it for this deck tech. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thought of a card you think should be included, or have a commander you'd like to see me brew or break down? Let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back with another video very soon. Hey, thanks for watching my video. If you haven't done so already, make sure you hit the subscribe button, ding the bell icon, and help me fight the evil algorithm overlords and the control players by liking this video and leaving a comment. I'll catch you next time.